Howdy, howdy. It's Thursday, which is not normally a semantics day, but today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Specifically, it's the 10th annual Global Accessibility Awareness Day, so I thought I would do my part to make us globally more aware of accessibility on this day. And so I thought I'd do a bit of an Ask Me Anything for accessibility questions. I see we've got a few people in the chat already. I see Isabel. I see Anthony. Hello, hello, howdy, howdy. Um, yeah, I figure we'll get to some pretty juicy questions. I've had a few come in through Discords and stuff like that. But as we're kind of warming up, I would love to hear from y'all. So if you're watching, I'd love for you to put in the chat your favorite accessibility tidbit or something that surprised you to learn about accessibility. And that way maybe we could get the chat kind of warmed up. Also, how are y'all doing today? I always feel weird asking those kinds of questions because I know there's going to be a bit of a delay for people watching. So it's like I ask a question and then I have to wait like 30 seconds for chats to come in. But yeah, yeah. Cool. So, Global Accessibility Awareness Day. Stephanie says it's not only mobile devices that trigger, quote, mobile views or reflow. Can you tell me more on that? Do you just mean like people can resize their websites to like resize their browsers to um, go to mobile responsive views, or is there specifically like other devices that will specifically see mobile views? I'd be curious to know. Um, Also, howdy, Seth. All right. Yeah, so I had a few people ask a few questions ahead of time. And one place that they asked questions, I just wanted to give a brief shout out first, was the React Podcast Discord server, which you can find if you go to this link right here, events.lunch.dev/discord. This is by far and away the most welcoming, warm, inviting online tech community I've found. And if that sounds exciting to you, go ahead and join. We've got an accessibility channel where we tend to have these kinds of conversations pretty asynchronously. So yeah, please go feel free to join the Discord, and I'm sure someone will be around to greet you as you come in. So we had a few questions come in from there. Oh, Stephanie says, I think a lesser known WCAG criteria is reflow, and often designs assume that if a quote mobile design is visible, then that means no hover, or you can skip worrying about focus or hover styles. But Zoom viewers trigger that. Oh, okay, that's cool. Good to know. Today I learned something. Maybe this needs to be the other way around, where for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, I ask the chat anything, and the chat comes up with answers. That would be a fun twist on the format, perhaps. Um, yeah, so go ahead and join the Discord. We had a few questions in there to start. I wanted to start off with kind of a quick and light one, which was about the DL element. So if you're unfamiliar with the DL element, this is one of my favorites. This is an element that is used to describe name value pairs. So what you would do is you would have this outer DL element, and then inside there you would describe, like, this would be your key or your label. So maybe if you're describing a book, you could have like author, and then I'm sorry, that's not D. I always get these mixed up. So you have the DT element, which is the term. So this is your like label or your name for a field, and then underneath it you have the value, which is DD, which is description detail, is what that's short for. So you could say, for instance, author Ben Myers, and then you could keep going. You could add like ISBN, stuff like that. This would have quite a few numbers, um, so forth. But so I love this element. I think it's underutilized. I think it describes a pretty common pattern. And when I've pitched this element to people in the past who have never seen this, I usually pitch this in terms of potential accessibility interactions you could get with something like this. Like, if you can imagine that if you could recognize that you were following a name value pattern, um, then screen reader users could treat that whole block as a block. And that means it would tell you, like, hey, you've reached a list of details. It would let you skip over the list if you didn't care. And it could also tell you, for instance, how many items are in this list and how far in the list you are. So there are potential accessibility advantages that you could get from this. However, recently, Michael Chan and I were informed of the support tables for these elements. So this is allysupport.io, which I'm going to put this link in the chat. But this basically gives you a whole bunch of tests of different screen readers on different browsers and tells you what the experience is. And you can see, like, this is not green all the way across. So the expectations for a DL element and its children are that it would convey its role. So it would tell you, hey, this is a list of descriptions. It would tell you how many items are in the list. And it would tell you, like, hey, you've started, like, you're in this list now, you're out of this list. And you can see that when the narrator screen reader for Windows, when that was tested against Microsoft Edge, absolutely none of these requirements were met. Same goes for Orca, which is a Linux screen reader. When tested against Firefox, none of these requirements were met. Same as TalkBack, which was not met for Chrome. And there's a couple of other places throughout. Mobile VoiceOver does not tell you how many items are in the list. And then we've got partial support for Chrome and Firefox. And so the question that Michael Chan asked me was, is like, what ramifications does the support table have for using these elements? Like, is the presence of red in this table, does that mean that these elements are now verboten and we can't use them? So the first thing I want to call out is that right here it says that the results were last validated 2 years ago. I believe support for these elements has increased somewhat over the past few years. So that's the first thing to keep in mind is, 2 years is a lifetime in the web, and these browsers and assistive technologies may have since fixed these issues. So I would be interested in seeing some more up-to-date tests here. The other thing is that I think it's helpful to consider this as a progressive enhancement against the alternative. So part of the reason I really like this format is because I have seen it in comparison to a div alternative, which is what my team used to use. So we used to have, divs, and inside divs there would be, more divs. This would be like, detail, item, something like that. And inside here we would get, surprise, surprise, more divs, and this would be like a label, and this would say, author. And then here we would have like a value and so forth, and this might say Ben Myers. So this right here, like, this is what I used to see a lot, and this is what I'm sure many teams are doing, something like this. And, this has basically no semantic value. It's just all a bunch of text nodes, right? And as a bunch of text nodes, screen reader users are just going to interpret it as a list of strings, which means that the default, if you're treating this as a bunch of divs, is fine. You get all the words in there. You just don't get any of the extra augmentations about, like, finding out how many items are in here and so forth. And the reason I bring that up is that browsers are pretty smart, and one of the things they do when they encounter an element that they're unfamiliar with is they'll treat it as basically a div. And this has the net effect of, for browsers and assistive technologies that don't understand the semantics behind these, those users aren't going to be losing any of the content. It's more or less like we had a bunch of divs in here. But for users who are using browsers and assistive technologies that do understand these roles, they get those augmentations. And that means that the DL kind of serves as a neat little progressive enhancement in that regard. And so my advice would be continue using these elements, because the worst that can happen is they're going to fall back to more or less divs which is what you were going to do anyways if you weren't using these semantics, is you would be using something like a div. So that would be my advice there. Um, I see that y'all have been testing out the commands. Yes, we have, if you're new here, we have the exclamation point tuna command, which summons forth the goodest boy. And we have the exclamation point chan command, which summons forth a pretty good boy. Um, so, yeah, let's see. We've got a question here from Anthony. What are the legal requirements that have been established from the Domino's accessibility case that developers should be aware of? Yeah, so I am going to send you to the World Wide Web Consortium's Web Accessibility Initiative has a page about specifically all the different laws and policies out there for litigating web accessibility requirements. This is a fantastic page. It'll tell you like what all the laws are and stuff like that, what specifically is expected. But while we've had quite a few web accessibility cases, some have been pretty high profile. One that I would call out is Gill versus Winn Dixie, which the court in question held that because Winn Dixie, the grocery chain, was a public accommodation, their website had to be accessible. This, I believe, was actually recently somewhat overturned. That decision was overturned, which means that we have a lot more things in flux. So this is kind of the context that we find ourselves in, is we have quite a few web accessibility court cases. Very few of them have actually been seen all the way through. Most of them have been dismissed as basically uninteresting questions. Like, for instance, there have been some that have questioned whether the specific litigant, the specific plaintiff was the right person for the suit. Like, oh, I tried to join this service, but I wouldn't even meet the admission policies anyways, but the site isn't accessible. Can I still sue? And basically it's like, well, no, because no damage was technically done, because you already technically wouldn't meet the admission requirements. So there's been a whole lot of cases that have been dismissed or resolved based on those kinds of edge cases without really getting to the heart of the question of whether websites themselves have to be accessible by virtue of being websites or by virtue of being connected to public accommodations. Most courts hold that websites are extensions of public accommodations. So if you're a restaurant, you're a public accommodation, and therefore your website is an extension of that public accommodation-ness. That's what most courts hold, but it's not 100% consensus there. There's a lot of flux. And so there's this case with Domino's. Domino's was sued. This case is Robles versus Domino's Pizza. Domino's Pizza was sued because their website was inaccessible. The plaintiff couldn't order a pizza using his screen reader. And this made it up to the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit said basically, hey, we recognize a previous decision held that, like, we should dismiss this course. We're gonna, like, a previous decision tried to dismiss that court case. The Ninth Circuit said, basically, let's undismiss it. And then Domino's decided to take this all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court refused to hear it. Which, you know, they can do, right? Because they get a whole bunch of cases. Not every case is going to establish an interesting precedent. But refusing to hear the case is a very interesting choice. Because effectively, and I am not a lawyer, please don't take this as legal advice, but effectively what refusing to hear the case means is that the status quo is maintained. And the status quo is there are a bunch of disabled plaintiffs suing businesses for having inaccessible websites. And the Supreme Court, if you read between the lines, was basically saying, we're not putting a stop to those cases. And so many web accessibility advocates took this as a victory for them, saying that, hey, the Supreme Court didn't put a stop to this. So they're implicitly encouraging or allowing these cases. If you're interested in the context of that, and wanting to learn more about what courts have to say on this, this was actually my first ever blog post. It was going to be the first in a series. That series has not been continued yet. But there you go. Anthony also asks, along these same lines, do you anticipate a turn towards more legality around web accessibility and more emphasis on compliance? Or do I think the Domino case is more of a one-off? It's absolutely not a one-off. We've already seen many, many cases, and the number of web accessibility cases continues to grow. However, I do think courts are more or less landing on this idea that websites are extensions of public accommodations. And so it's not that a website has to inherently be accessible, but rather that most websites tend to be extensions of brick and mortar public facing accommodations, and those have to be accessible. So, yeah. All right. So, Anthony, great questions. Thank you so much for asking. I wanted to get to a question that Brooks asked in the Discord here, and so I'm actually going to kind of pull this up. And so yeah, this question more or less asks like, hey, it's a question that we get a lot, which is that accessibility is important, but how do I convince my business partners and my developers, my fellow developers, to meet accessibility requirements, right? How do I convince them to care about accessibility? And that's a hard question. Especially when you work at a small company and you feel like you already, like, maybe you're working with specific clients or building for specific stakeholders because it's an internal app, and so you already feel like you know for sure that the people who are using this app don't have access needs. And I find this a really challenging question, right? You're trying to like fundamentally just get people to care about accessibility, get them to prioritize it. And so the way I think about this is I tend to need to break down different audiences who I might need to convince about accessibility. And part of a disclaimer I should give is that the company I work for, we explicitly serve veterans, and that means that we already have a high dedication to accessibility anyways. I've been very privileged in that regard, so I haven't actually really been in the case of needing to convince people of the importance of accessibility. It's just a part of our culture. But the way I would go about this is I would break this out into kind of two big audiences that I at least would interact with. So first of all, there's the audience of fellow developers, and then there's the audience of our business partners. So this could be your product owner, this could be your design partners, etc. I break these out into two groups because I think the ways that you're going to motivate them to implement accessibility are going to be different. So with business partners, I find that a selling point is going to be things like compliance. So I would send them the link to that Web Accessibility Initiative laws and policy page to convince them that, hey, like, web accessibility is the law. Especially, like, all the stuff I gave about, like, public accommodations, like, that's very American-centric. If you look at the EU, it's basically a de facto requirement, or even, I guess, a de jure requirement, right? Like, you have to be accessible to operate in the EU. So, yeah, accessibility is part of compliance. There are laws in place. And this applies, by the way, to internal applications as well, where those laws, if you have inaccessible internal applications, that's treated as an employee discrimination case. So, yeah, I would convince them of compliance. That would be part of it. There's also, there's always the money factor. When disabled users don't use your app, you're losing out on their potential business. But there's in the EU, this is called the purple pound. It's the concept of this kind of ripple effect of losing disabled users as their audience, because disabled users tend to be very vocal about which apps they can or can't use, and that means that they're much less likely to recommend your app to other people, including their non-disabled family, friends, and loved ones. Non-disabled family, friends, and loved ones are going to be less likely to use your app if they know that their disabled friends can't use them. So that's the purple pound is what that is. let's see, there was, yeah, so, um, this is generally how I would convince business partners, right? Is like, uh, it's the law, there's money involved, stuff like that. That tends to be at very least how I try to get a word in edgewise with like more bureaucratic stuff, right? Is it money and the law, right? But developers I found tend to be much more, I guess like much less motivated by saying, oh, this is the law, and much more motivated by creating good products, right? So the way you're going to want to convince fellow developers is going to be different, right? You're going to want to really hammer home that like accessibility is how you make a good product. And so there's different ways I sell that. So one way that I would sell that is by convincing them of something called the curb cut effect. The curb cut effect is this phenomenon that disability accommodations benefit wider audiences. For instance, closed captions are meant to make media more accessible for deaf viewers. However, it also benefits people who are in noisy environments, for instance, or people who are learning a new language. Um, and so while you might believe that you don't have disabled users, the truth is non disabled users are going to benefit from these accommodations as well. For instance, if you've got power users who want to be able to tab all over the place, then they're going to thank you for having, considered keyboard navigation. So curb cut effect is one way I try to sell it. Another way I try to sell it is that your requirements are going to change. Um, you know, Maybe right now your policy isn't necessarily to have a robust accessibility process, but down the road it totally could be. Maybe you've realized, oh, it is the law, right? Or, oh, we've just hired an employee. This employee is disabled, and we have a whole bunch of like inaccessible internal apps. Requirements change, and it's so much easier to develop for accessibility when you've baked it in from the start rather than when you're trying to bolt on accessibility after the fact. And bolt on accessibility is just always inferior to baked in accessibility. So requirements change. Set yourself up for success by just considering accessibility from the get go. The next thing I'll say is that jobs change. Maybe right now the job that you're in doesn't care about accessibility, but the industry as a whole is becoming much more cognizant about accessibility, and you're at some point going to want to find a different job, quite possibly, right? And so those jobs are going to be expecting you to have accessibility familiarity. So set yourself up for success now by practicing now. And the other thing I would add is that I believe accessibility and robustness go hand in hand. So when you like one of the big things for accessibility is that you use semantic markup, and semantic markup ensures that your controls have all of the necessary functionality just kind of out of the box, right? In a way that's familiar for different people who have, encountered web pages before. The behavior remains consistent and workable, and if you were to like roll your own control, like if you were to implement your own button, you might forget key things like focus behavior or keyboard navigability, right? And as developers, I don't know, I personally really value robustness, right? Like knowing that what I built works for all the edge cases. Another way that accessibility and robustness goes hand in hand is when you're considering accessibility through the design process, through figuring out the UX, when you include personas with access needs in your thought process, you're going to encounter a lot more experiences that you wouldn't otherwise encounter necessarily, and that means that you're you're gonna have a much stronger a much stronger understanding of who could be using your app and how, and you can build for that. To paraphrase Marcy Sutton on the React podcast, when you see someone who's struggling with your app, that's not an edge case, that's a person. So accessibility and robustness, they go hand in hand. When you consider accessibility from the start, you're going to have a much stronger understanding of who could be using your app and how. So this is usually how I would try to sell it, and based on who I'm selling it to. Um, yeah. Uh, so Stephanie is asking, what are some criteria I think get missed most often besides color contrast and semantics? Um, oh man, that's a hard one because I want to say based on the latest DQ system reports, it's something like 33% of accessibility defects were specifically color contrast ones. Um, Let me see if I can find that actually. Now that I think about it, um, do gonna go. Uh, Here it is. It's a PDF. I'm gonna send y'all a PDF. Uh, there you go. So this is DQ Systems report on defects that were surfaced by automated accessibility testing. Um, and they did break down, it's somewhere in here, a whole bunch of failings, but stuff like here we go, the top 7 WCAG success criteria with the highest proportion of automated issues, so not necessarily things that were surfaced by manual testing but automated testing at least, were not supplying the page language. So this is, if you go to the like root level HTML tag, you should put like a lang equals and then the 2-letter code. So for me, for the sites I build, right, every site should have this HTML lang equals and then you can get into your head and body stuff. And that is helpful for helping assistive technology know, hey, this is the page language. Here's how you should be pronouncing words. Here's what the like names of inputs are going to be. Stuff like that. Travis says a blind user at a conference I went to said his biggest frustration was buttons with no label. Yeah, absolutely. Like, oftentimes we create links and buttons with no discernible text in them because it's super trendy to stick in here, some icon, right? Maybe we have like a plus icon to add something, right? I guess that would be more likely to be a button. But it visually looks very nice, but an icon is not meaningful text, and so a screen reader doesn't actually know how to announce this besides simply button. So that's a pretty common one. Let's see. The another one is non-text content. So this is having text alternatives for non-text content. So this would be providing image alt text, describing a graph, stuff like that. And then there's this bypass blocks one, which is providing mechanisms to skip over repetitive content. So if you're familiar with skip links, this is another big one, is you've got a whole bunch of cruft before you get to the main contents of the page. You want to provide like a link or something to... you want to provide a link or something to skip directly to the main contents of the page. So, yeah, those are some of the most common ones, at least as surfaced by DQ. So I hope that helped. Let's see if there's... okay, we did have another question in the Discord from Dan. Dan was asking... actually, let me put this up on screen. I'm going to try to... yeah. So one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is manual accessibility testing with screen readers, etc. It's something I'd like to dive more into, but also know that developers can sometimes make things way worse when they don't fully understand the technology. I'd love to hear any advice you may have for getting started with manual testing responsibly. Yeah, I actually just did kind of a Twitter thread about this that I will find and stick in the chat as well. But the long and short of this is that yeah, developers can cause a lot of damage when they only have a surface level understanding of how disabled users use how disabled users use assistive technology. Here's the top of the thread. So the first thing I would recognize is that disabled users, by necessity, become power users of their assistive technology. So as such, if you are not testing with assistive technology like a power user, you're missing out on a wide depth of experiences there, a wide depth of user experiences, a wide depth of personas of people who will actually visit your page. When it comes to screen readers, I think it's easy to focus on screen readers because at least as a sighted developer, those like screen reader experiences feel the most foreign to me. I'm sure many people can relate to that. With screen readers, the way I like to introduce them is as like they have different navigation modes. And maybe the helpful thing for me to do would be to actually open up VoiceOver so I can kind of show you these modes real quick. So let me do that. VoiceOver is gonna think for a bit.
VoiceOver on system preferences, accessibility window,
Okay.
accessibility.
So I've got VoiceOver on. This is the built-in screen reader for Mac. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna demonstrate some of the different navigation modes that you can have with a screen reader. These are all broadly going to be applicable in different ways for different screen readers. So the first is, as developers, as power users of computers, this is what we're going to be most likely to do, which is tabbing. So I'm going to tab through on this page.
Home, leaving, install, Zoom, X, sub, Chrome, pop-up button. Skip to recommended content button. Skip to secondary content button. You are currently on a button inside of web content. Visited link, Twitter, banner, visited link, link, more link, tweet, banner. You are currently on a link. To click this link and two more edit, tweet text, edit text, new line, insertion at beginning of text.
So, the thing to note about tabbing, right, is that you're only supposed to tab to interactive elements. And I bring that up because I have quite a few times introduced people to screen readers and they've like tried to tab to things and then immediately turned around and put like a tab index attribute on a whole bunch of paragraph tags and divs because, quote, you couldn't tab to it with a screen reader. Tabbing implies interactivity. Tabbing implies you can do something to this element with the keyboard. So, broadly speaking, links, buttons, and form fields are going to be the things that you're going to tab to. There are a few other exceptions. Things get more complex. But broadly speaking, it's going to be links, buttons, and form fields. So that's tabbing. You can go to all the different focusable, tabbable, keyboard interactive things. The next thing is, let me close out of this tweet dialogue.
Closed, visited, link.
The next thing is you might be wondering, like, well, okay, in that case, how do I navigate to static stuff? And so the next mode to show off is the virtual cursor. So this is just like if you were in Microsoft Word and you were to, hit the arrow keys. And in fact, with most screen readers, I believe moving the virtual cursor is, you do that with the arrow keys. So I'm going to click in here real quick.
Hey, selected.
So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to hit, this is for VoiceOver, it's Control, Option, and then the arrow keys.
At Weaving. Screen reader survey, I'm struck by. 1. 94.6% respondents reported at least intermediate screen reader proficiency, most said advanced. 2. 98.8% reported at least intermediate internet proficiency, also mostly advanced. Link, number A11Y. Link, weaving.org/project/screen.
So, yeah, that is the arrow keys. You can also, I think, use the up and down keys to basically, like, hone in on getting more and more specific or less and less specific. And that's important because many people will, if they're confused at what a word was, they can go back and go through that word letter by letter. I bring that up because I've sometimes heard people, developers realize like, oh, the screen reader is mispronouncing a word, and so I have to go in and add some hidden text to correct for this. I'll add maybe a phonetic spelling or something like that. And then they don't realize that this has broken things for refreshable braille display users who now have to like read your phonetic spelling instead of the words that you actually typed. Screen reader users can navigate to words like letter by letter if they need. So you usually don't need to hold their hand in that regard. So that's mode number 2 is the continuous reading mode. And so mode number 3 that you're going to find across screen readers, generally across screen readers, is skipping from element to element of the same type. So skipping from heading to heading, or link to link, or button to button, or form field to form field, and so forth. JAWS has a whole bunch of different key bindings for all the different types. VoiceOver, I find, simplifies the process by introducing the rotor. So in VoiceOver, I'm going to do Control Option U.
Landmarks menu.
And this tells me all the different landmarks on the page. So as I scroll through this with the arrow keys.
Banner. Primary navigation. Main. Ben Myers T-Rex at Ben D. Myers as I reread the last at we screen read.
So you can see it's targeting different parts of the page.
Articles menu. 3. Ben Meyer's Tyrannosaurus petting left window spots links menu.
So here I can skip
Link.
from
View visited. Link.
here I can skip from link to link, and so forth. And so what this tells me is that the links that I write could be accessed totally out of context, right? I could get to a link without getting to any of the surrounding text, which is why there's a WCAG success criterion specifically for links should be identifiable even out of context. Like they should have distinct text and they should be very clear about what they do. This is why you would not want a whole bunch of click here links or read more links. You want to be much more specific about where the link goes, stuff like that. So these are the three different navigation modes that I usually highlight for assistive technology. Highlight for screen readers. There are other assistive technologies. Those I find a little easier to wrap my head around, like screen magnifiers. But yeah, mostly I would just kind of read up on those and see kind of what their experience is. Lots of people post their own experiences as like videos on YouTube. So you can find videos on YouTube that are, here's how I navigate like a web page using a refreshable braille display. And those can be hugely illuminating, I think. So yeah.
Voiceover off.
Let's see. Many of our designers hate the constraints of color contrast on their beautiful designs. I've suggested an Apple-like approach with low and high contrast modes. Number one, is it fair to offer a low contrast mode for folks who prefer it? And number two, have you seen any good examples of this approach? I I think it's fair to offer a low contrast mode, especially because like while we talk a lot about high contrast for visibility, if you go too far in the high contrast, you can be very overstimulating for people with autism, for instance. And so there is a balance to strike there. So yes, I think it is fair to provide a low contrast mode. I think the key there is giving users the choice there, much like how you would give the users I firmly believe like if you're going to offer a light mode and a dark mode, you need to offer a light mode dark mode toggle, especially because many people don't necessarily know how to go into their operating system settings to change their preferences for light mode or dark mode. The same goes for animation. Most people don't know that you can turn off animations and enable the prefers reduced motion. So giving toggles, giving people the UI controls to be able to set their own preferences is, I think, the way to go there. And I can't think of any particular sites right now that have done that particularly well. Anthony says, "Do you know of any good resources for something like design patterns for accessibility?" So not straight up accessibility tags, but more so best practices that have been condensed into specific kind of code samples. Well, she was in the chat earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and highlight Steph's CSS resource here, Small CSS. So that's a good one for specifically handling CSS things accessibly. I think another resource that I tend to enjoy, and I know a lot of people do too, is inclusivecomponents.design. This doesn't necessarily help in every use case. I think sometimes Hayden here has condensed a wide variety of experiences into something that is perhaps a little too oversimplified sometimes, but I think this is a great place to start, particularly when you don't know what it is you're looking for. So I would highly recommend going through this site as a foundation. I also really love Adrian Roselli's Under Engineered series. He's got a whole set of blog posts that's like, here's how you can create complex-ish experiences that are accessible, but also use kind of minimal markup, minimal ARIA, stuff like that. He's got a few of these and no good way to see all of them, so just Google it. Google Adrian Roselli Under Engineered. This is a fantastic resource for learning different patterns to use. So yeah, those are some of the ones that come to mind right now. Yeah, so these are great questions. Chan's asking about. Also, I'm so sorry you missed the low contrast answer. Broadly speaking, the answer was it depends. Give users the choice. Low contrast is fine, especially for autistic users. Give people the choice in the interface of the application. Oh, yes, the ARIA authoring practices. I can't believe I missed those. Steph, you're totally right. Yes, let me get those. All right. That was not how you name it. Yo, I kid you not. I woke up 2 minutes before stand up this morning, and that has set the tone for the rest of my day today. But the ARIA authoring practices are fantastic. They describe several common rich controls that you might want to make, and some of the keyboard, like the expected keyboard interactions, the ARIA, the semantics, stuff like that. Highly worthwhile giving these a read. It is a little dry, but it's as close as you can get to the specs, I think, while still being approachable. So, yeah, let's see. You've got this question in here. In 2021, there's an accessibility minded carousel. There's a fantastic resource for learning more about carousels. And it is shouldiuseacarousel.com. This is a bit of a snarky answer here, but broadly speaking, I don't think anyone's quite gotten this work right. There's just too many things to consider with all the keyboard behavior, the live announcements, the animation, stuff like that. Jimena, welcome. How's it going, Jimena? It's good to have you here. Yeah, so shouldiuseacarousel.com is fantastic, if a little snarky. So, yeah, broadly speaking, carousels, anti-pattern. Yeah. Cool. Do we have any other questions at the moment? I'm gonna scroll through, but yeah, not a lot of love for carousels in the chat. Let's see. Probably not gonna go too long. I think I'm gonna wrap this up at like 12:50 or so. Mainly because I have a 1 o'clock that I'm gonna be at. So yeah. How do I think about using puns as educational tools? I can get up to some antics from time to time. Do you want to clarify more what you mean there, Anthony? Um, oh man. Yeah, absolutely. And I've got. I'll be uploading this after the fact with captions on YouTube. Yes, I actually will be uploading this on YouTube. Let's see. Some antics. I think you usually have to put like Ben Myers on here. I think I'm about to get like a vanity domain, but in the meantime, here's where you do it. You can also follow Semantics on Twitter. I post all the videos there as they go live. Yeah, which is a good shout out to go follow the stream on Twitter. This is usually the best place to get all the updates. All right. Yeah, so I think, do we have any last minute questions? I'll give that some a bit of time to simmer. All right. Yeah, so in the meantime, I guess I want to go ahead and pitch what we're doing on Tuesday. Actually, this is hitting on the theme of, where do you go to learn more about accessibility? So I've had this experience quite a few times. For instance, when I had Anthony on the stream, the first semantic stream way back in January, I casually mentioned a thing called skip links. And Anthony was like, whoa, what's that? I've never heard this word. And I think that's oftentimes how accessibility goes. It's like you hear this thing and you're like, wait a second. I've not seen this before. I don't know what you're talking about here. What is this? Who is this for? So I wanted to build an open source project, an open source web accessibility resource that's designed not to be super in-depth, but basically make it as easy as possible to surface accessibility concepts that you might not have heard about. And so I don't know if y'all are familiar with Tatiana Mack's self-defined app. I love this. This is a dictionary, an encyclopedia for different terms pertaining to minoritized folks, self-defined. So it's minoritized folks describing words that describe them. For instance, I've gone in and described the word disability dongle. So this is a fantastic project, and I love this. And inspired by this, I want to build basically a web accessibility resource like this. So you would go there; it would have a whole bunch of different terms, things like color contrast or skip links, and you could go there and go, I've never actually seen this word before. Go learn more. So that's what I want to build over the next stream. That's what I'm going to be building on Tuesday. So if y'all are interested in that, come join us Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central. That's what I'm gonna be making. I would love to get definitions from y'all as well. So yeah, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. I know that this is a bit more of a surprising stream than usual. I usually have more notice. I usually have the regular Tuesday cadence, but I figured it would be good since it's Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and also, candidly. I want to get a few more streams in over the next few weeks, in part because I'd like to be able to reach Twitch affiliate status. The reason I want to do that is I want to be able to provide. So I provide closed captions on all the VODs on YouTube, but I'm currently manually writing those, and that's a very time-consuming process. It's easy to fall behind. I'd like to be able to start like paying people who do this better than I do to do this, but I would like to actually have a bit of subscription money to kick into that at least, so that perhaps it's not quite so expensive every week. So that's what I'm working towards, candidly. And so you might see a few more just kind of pop-up streams like this every once in a while. And if you've got any ideas for things you'd like to see, any ideas for things I should do, reach out. And if you want to be on the stream, reach out. I would love to have more people on, particularly people who aren't necessarily in my network. So yeah, y'all, this has been a great time. I hope I was able to answer these questions helpfully. I hope y'all learned a lot. I hope y'all had fun. And I will see you on Tuesday, where we will be building an open source web accessibility encyclopedia for the common developer. It's been good. I'll see you on Tuesday.